Hi everybody, it's David from Doctors of Running, and today we have a fun head-to-head. We have all of these super spikes, at least for the long distance shoes that I own. We have the Nike Dragonfly here. We have the Adidas Avanti TYO and the Hoka Cielo. So these are some of the shoes that you've been seeing on some of the best athletes in the country running around in ovals, making a lot of left turns, mainly in the 5K and 10K distances, but you have seen the Dragonfly at the 1500, you have seen the Avanti at the 1500 on multiple Adidas athletes. So today's going to be the comparison video going down the line and comparing all three of these shoes. I would do the New Balance MDX as well, however, it's more in the middle distance category, and these are all more long distance racers. Long distance racers being pretty much those distances from the 1500 meter all the way up to the 10K. Some people will even go as far to say 5K to 10K, but a lot of these have versatility in the 1500 as well. Going down the line, just some basic differences. On the Adidas Avanti here, men's size 9, we're looking at 5.6 ounces, so this one's a little bit heavier on the spike side of things. Does have full length Light Strike Pro midsole. A little bit more of a forgiving geometry with the heel here, almost more like a hybrid between a racing flat and a spike. It does have the energy rods that go down the midline of the shoe here and follows the metatarsals as you go through the forefoot. There's a very basic spike plate up front, and this spike, for being a track spike, actually has some pretty decent flexibility through there. So it's something you can definitely feel on the run. We'll go into the ride in a little bit here, but I'm kind of going more down the specs. Nike Dragonfly here, your 1500 to 5K racer. You've seen it on the feet of many great athletes in the world. Does have the ZoomX midsole, Pebax midsole through the entirety of the shoe. It utilizes a Pebax plate, not a carbon plate. A lot of people think it's a carbon plate. Still decently rigid enough though, and the plate's a little bit more spooned out as far as coming down here and then spooning down into that region and coming up. So you got some rigidity. This one weighs in at 4.7 ounces, men's size 9. And then last but not least, we have the Hoka Cielo LD. This shoe uses a compressed molded EVA midsole. Does keep the weight down quite a bit while still keeping a good amount of cushioning on the shoe. It does use a traditional horseshoe plate through here as the spike plate, and a carbon fiber plate that runs through and basically fans out this way. The feel on here, a little bit softer than the traditional track spikes of the past with the compressed molded EVA. However, it doesn't quite have the softness or bounciness of the new generation midsoles. Is that a bad thing? Not necessarily. It just depends on the preferences of the runner. Some of the biggest differences I've been noticing, I'll start off with the Hoka Cielo. So this one's going to ride the closest to a traditional track spike out of all three of them. It still uses an EVA midsole. Even though there's plenty of cushioning underfoot, it's just still has that generic ride where it's kind of relatively flat through and then it spoons up. A lot of rigidity up front, and you can really bounce off. It's the lightest of all of the shoes. I forgot to say that. This is 3.7 ounces, so a full ounce lighter than the Dragonfly. Very minimal upper, locks down real well. There's a little bit of sidewall integration through the medial and lateral aspect of the shoe. You feel really grounded in this shoe. You feel nice and stable. You feel light on your feet. It does all of the things you want a track spike to do. The carbon fiber plate provides a nice amount of rigidity and a good amount of bounciness to the shoe. So this is going to feel like a track spike of the old days with a little bit of integration of new stuff, but it's still going to feel, it has that EVA feel to it. You're still going to feel grounded. You're still going to feel nimble. This is like the normal track spike that's just got a couple of upgrades. A lot of people have been telling if this shoe came out like 2 to 3 years ago, this would have been the best shoe on the market most likely for the distance track spikes, in my opinion. Is it still comparable with the other two shoes? I think it might be, just because of the weight differential. I mean, if you're looking between this and the Dragonfly, you've got a full ounce of weight. If you're looking between the Cielo and the Avanti, you're looking at almost 2 ounces of weight per shoe. So from a lightweight standpoint, this is a very lightweight, nimble, and responsive racer. Next one on the list, I'm going to go on to the Nike Dragonfly. So This still feels like a track spike. Don't get me wrong. Just because it has ZoomX foam in it does not mean that this is not a track spike. I alluded to it earlier, but you can see that the plate is embedded in here and it's tuned downwards and then rounds right back up. And so you can still feel that very track-like sensation. The ZoomX midsole does still have some softness and forgivingness to it, just like the Vaporfly does. This was probably the first shoe that I've put on where I actually wanted bigger spikes. For whatever reason, when I was landing on the forefoot, it took me a little bit of adjusting to the ZoomX midsole. I felt like I was suspending into the shoe a little more than I wanted to when I was picking up the pace. And I like to run with 3/16 spikes usually, so these are not the ones that came with it. I only got one set right now, so right now they're in my Avantis. But normally I do run in the smaller spikes. I just kind of switch them out depending on what I'm wearing that day. But you still get plenty of bounce in this shoe. Still a very lightweight foot, lightweight on foot. The last is relatively narrow through the midfoot here. So it comes narrow, then widens out. So you have a nice stable base up in the forefoot. But if you do have some instability issues coming through the heel and midfoot here, I was noticing that sidewall integration here doesn't do too much. I still feel a little flippity floppity, kind of collapsing inwards a little bit. But overall, the shoe's still very responsive, lightweight, plenty of bounce. The heel was more forgiving than I thought it was going to be, but it's still not quite comparable to, say, the Avanti. Forefoot wise, there was plenty of cushion underfoot. You could easily take this 5K to 10K. So the versatility is certainly there with enough responsiveness to drop a 1500 as well. So definitely a very well done spike, but if you have some stability issues, you may want to look into something like the Avanti or even really the Cielo. The deep midline groove down through here does keep you pretty centralized. And the sidewalls in this track spike actually do feel like they hold you centered a little bit more. So for stability needs, if you are sensitive through the midfoot, these two might actually be better options. But looking at the Avanti TYO now, so like I said earlier, it's kind of similar to a racing flat track spike hybrid. The shoe weighs in at 5.6 ounces, men's size 9, so it's a little bit more chunky, but don't let that fool you. It still has plenty of responsiveness underfoot. Even though it has a little bit more flexibility, I actually like that because on foot, the Light Strike Pro midsole, because there probably is a heel plate in here. I don't have confirmation on that. But when you land, the foam itself does feel softer. You feel like you're suspending into that track a little bit more. So when you land and you load up through that midfoot here and coming through those energy rods onto the spike plate, that little bit of extra time to get onto the forefoot, I actually like that. It feels like you're loading up that shoe, almost like you're tuning it up and then popping off the forefoot. The last as well is a little bit wider underfoot, so it does give you a little bit more surface area to play with when you're landing and coming through. So on foot, for my mechanics especially, I have a little bit of stability issues, not always, more when I fatigue, but at slower paces especially, like if I'm running a 10K, I really like the way the Avanti rides on my foot. For the 5K, I think I'm going to have to come down to these two. It's such a close call, and I'm still in the process of making that decision for myself, and we'll find out in the coming weeks as to which shoe I decide on. The Hoka Cielo, great track spike. I think I just like that new generation foam a little bit more in these shoes. I think, like I said, if this was a couple years ago, I'd be grabbing this in an instant. But not a bad shoe. I think they're all still relatively comparable, especially since this one weighs so much less. But with that said, between these two, if we're looking more in the shorter distances, 1500, I'm going Dragonfly. 5K, I still got to toss a coin. 10K, I'm going Avanti. I don't think there's any questions on that one for me. I think that just works well for my mechanics. I like that little bit of flexibility and a little bit more forgiveness in the heel here. I feel like I can load it a little more and I don't have to worry about it. And as far as the actual upper and fit goes, it actually fits my foot a little bit better. They all have track spike fits traditionally. I mean, you're going to have a relatively performance lockdown with a relatively narrow heel, like normal to, I guess you could say, normal to slightly narrow midfoot, normal toe box. That's actually not too bad as far as the width goes for most track spikes, and then kind of a tapered off toe box there. Dragonfly is pretty similar to the Cielo. Narrow in the heel, maybe perhaps a little bit wider through that midfoot, and then it kind of widens out in the toe box, right in the forefoot, and then eventually tapers off as well. The Avanti stays pretty normal throughout. You have some narrow, like the heel's relatively narrow, the midfoot has, I wouldn't even go to say it's narrow, I'd say it's more normal. It's kind of right in the middle there, but it locks down really well. The lacing system pulls that up, and the mesh here supports itself with no overlays essentially. So it holds its structure really well in that portion of the foot, and then the toe box and forefoot, I'd say normal to slightly wide here as well. All of them run true to size. I'd probably say the Cielo might come a little bit shorter on the length end. Dragonfly is true to size for me. The length is fine, but there's just, I don't know, it's a performance fit, relatively snug. You're not going to be wearing it for all that long, so I guess the swelling doesn't matter too much. Adidas shoes always tend to run me slightly long, so the length is a little bit on the longer end, but it's nothing, I wouldn't say it's above, I wouldn't say to size down. It's still true to size and still dials in well for a track spike. So just for a quick recap, heaviest on the line, Adidas Avanti TYO, lightest on the line, Cielo, Dragonfly right in the middle. It's kind of a convenient, almost like ounce mark each one. 5.6 ounces, 4.7 ounces, 3.7 ounces in men's size 9, all long distance track spikes. All good options if you are more of a purist, you like that low to the ground track spike feel, and you want to be nimble and lightweight in the lightest package you can get. That's going to be the Hoka Cielo. There's still plenty of protection on here for 5K to 10K. It's just not quite as soft or bouncy because the midsole is still that compressed molded EVA. You don't quite get that Light Strike Pro or Zoom X feel, but you do get that traditional track spike feel with a decent amount of cushion underfoot. Dragonfly, Zoom X, bouncy, forgiving through the forefoot. Definitely more of a traditional track spike design as far as the actual plate goes. Yeah, takes a little bit more unstable with the narrow last coming through. But when you're running fast and if you have good mechanics and you're going for it, probably not going to matter too much. It's more when you get sloppy and a little bit more tired. The Avanti probably allows for the most forgiveness on form there, but a little bit of a wider last, a little bit more flexibility, heavier option, but this may be one that works for a lot of people. Still lightweight. I mean, 5.6 ounces is still really light. I mean, it's still almost a full ounce lighter than a Vaporfly, so you still get that super foam cushioning, you still get the responsiveness out of a shoe like that. It still would fall in that super spike category for me. So that's what we have. We have the super spike comparisons here. It's our head-to-head battle. We have 3 shoes on it today. If you like the video, please smash that like button, subscribe. We're on, I mean, everything imaginable at this point. So if you want to look into Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, podcasting on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, we're on everything. Feel free to check us out. It's Doctors of Running. And we're going to have a lot more content coming consistently. If you've been following us, you know we're good about producing content. So if you want to look at written reviews of all of these shoes, they're all either out or in the process of coming out. You could find that at doctorsofrunning.com.